Hello, my name is Jeremy. This is Red Means Recording, and I thought it would be a cool idea to take a look at my favorite software synth at the moment, Arturia Pigments. When people come to me asking to do lessons on synthesis, Pigments is the VST that I reach for a number of reasons. One, it has three separate engines, a virtual analog, a wavetable, and a granular sample playback engine, all three of which represent sort of the, triumvirate of synthesis stuff that I use regularly. Two, it's super visual, and I really think that that's a useful thing when you're getting started with synthesis. Three, it's very modular in that you can do tons of cross modulation, and I really love that. And last but not least, it sounds really fantastic. So in the interest of making people happy, I had a lot of requests for this on my Discord to check out Pigments, talk about why I think it's good, talk about what it can do, and probably play some patches along the way. If you've been considering picking up a synthesizer that can do a lot of modern and other kinds of sounds, I would absolutely recommend Pigments, but know that you don't need this to make music. There is a fantastic free synth on the market right now called Vital that I would like to recommend you check out as well. So if you are short on cash, don't worry about it. You can still make music. I just really like this as my commercial VST. So let's get started. The first thing I do when I try to walk people through Pigments is go up to the Alt Types folder here, go to Template, and choose Analog Triple VCO. This loads probably one of the most classic sort of subtractive synthesizer patches that we could deal with. It also shows off the most basic engine that we have here, which is the analog engine. This gives us 3 oscillators, 4 wave shapes each, classic stuff like pulse width modulation, and sets us up with a filter that has envelope 2 already normalized to it, which is useful. So let's talk about what's going on up here. We'll turn down all the other oscillators except for the first one. We have some classic wave shapes like sine, triangle, with width, saw, no width, and pulse. Nick-bat. Each one comes with a coarse knob, so you can tune them. This one's set up to an octave above. You can see LFO 3 here is doing something, and if we click on it, we'll see that it is set over to our fine tune for both engines. And you can see that it's set to mod wheel, and it's going. So what happens if we turn up our mod wheel? Oh, hey! We get some very classic pitch modulation. We're currently in polyphonic mode. We can change that by going over to the keyboard here and changing these settings right here. So let's do mono real quick so you can hear what that sounds like. Mono means you can only play one note at once, and every single time you hit a note, things like envelopes will re-trigger. There's also legato mode. Legato mode acts similar to mono mode in that you can only press one note at once, but the envelopes don't re-trigger if you overlap notes. Let's go ahead and make this obvious by going back to our envelope and listening to what happens when we overlap notes. In mono mode, every single time I pressed a key, it would have re-triggered this envelope right here. But in legato mode, it doesn't. There's actually all kinds of gate sources for your envelopes here. There's a dizzying amount of possibility when it comes to modulation in Pigments, and that's why I really like it. I still have not plumbed all of the options here. So let's go back to like Poly 16, which will give us 16 voices. Of course, we have things like glide. We can choose how glide works. Then we have all kinds of fancy curves for velocity and aftertouch and stuff like that. I don't really mess with these that much because I don't really feel like I need to. So right now we're rocking 2 oscillators, both of them pulse waves. Let's go ahead and bring in oscillator 3, which is currently set to 12 semitones down or an octave down. Got a nice sub bass. Very useful for creating bass sounds. So without, with. You can hear it thicken up. Unlike Serum, we do not have access, as far as I know, to a dedicated sub-oscillator. So you will have to do some, addition of engines or your stacking of oscillators to create subs. But because we have so many options here, it's really not that big a deal. Before we get out of this mode, let's go ahead and talk about some stuff over here. Tune is your overall course tune. And there is a very, very cool thing in here where if you go to Q here and edit, you can actually quantize this to stay to certain notes in your modulation, which is really, really neat. So if we were to pick some very, very simple notes here and then modulate this with, let's say, LFO 2, you modulate things by clicking on it and then turning up the knob here. So this LFO now is modulating our course tune, but because we have these notes selected, it only picks certain notes. Very, very cool feature. Let's go ahead and turn these all back on and disable that modulation that we just made. You can disable modulation very quickly by clicking this little plus symbol next to anything. You can see that we have a plus symbol here. And this gives us access to a different form of looking at our modulation. So while clicking on, for instance, one of these gives you access to route this to anything on here. Clicking on the plus symbol next to something gives you the ability to see everything that's currently modulating it and setting it to like whatever you want. So very, very cool way of implementing modulation and access to seeing what's going on with your modulation. TBH. Let's talk about drift real quick. If we turn this up, we'll hear some drift between notes. To the extreme. Turn this down, we'll get some of that nice sort of analog drift every single time you hit a note, which people often talk about what warmth is and if a synth can be warm. And a lot of that has to do with the way the filter topology works. We'll get to the filter shortly. And also sort of this instability in the tuning of the individual oscillators. So by spreading the pitch a little bit for each oscillator, you can see that these are already tuned a little off. So if we were to put these right at 0 and then tune them again, you hear that sort of almost chorusing sound. I think that's what people, that's one thing you can reach for if you're trying to make things, quote, sound more analog. Wonderful. Unison. I love Unison so much. So Unison creates copies of your sound and spreads them across the stereo field. So let's go ahead and just hold down a chord and listen to what happens. It's so fucking nice. Hey, we're Disaster Piece. Isn't that fantastic? Also useful for like sort of those future bass super saw, hyper saw sounds. We have 3 forms of unison. We have classic chord, which is actually real cool. This is like the 4MS ensemble oscillator almost, in that we can increase and decrease the spread of our oscillators across a particular chord, and then spread them stereo as well. Get that classic sort of deep house deep house vibe, which is very, very, very cool. And then super saw. Let's go back to our saws. Turn up our cutoff frequency. Turn this up. Turn this down. And let's be the Chainsmokers. You have to be careful that you don't play more than 3 notes if you want to sound like the Chainsmokers. Let's turn our unisons back down. Fantastic. Okay. Pulse width modulation is the modulation of the width of a pulse. Surprise, surprise. What does this sound like? Well, it kind of is really good for things like strings and stuff like that. Also some leads. Vangelis uses it quite a bit, as I have recently learned. So let's go into our LFO and modulate some pulse width modulation. LFO 1. We're going to do something with LFO 1 that I think it's important to show off, and that's the reset source. So every single time you hit a key with this particular reset source turned on, this LFO will start at 0. I'm going to change this to free running so that this keeps on going. So make sure that you pay attention to the sources that you have here for the reset, because there's a lot of options here, and they're all very, very useful. Let's go ahead and turn this way down, and we're going to change our rate from synced. So right now this is synced to the beat, as you might expect, and we'll turn it way down, and we will change the amount. I want this to hit the sides, but not really like ever stop moving. So let's hit the plus symbol to open up its individual modulation and turn this down. Cool. Let's take this width, put it up, hit this button here, and do a negative modulation. So now they're moving across from each other. All right, what does that sound like? Very classic Selena string sound. You know I gotta put that unison on it. Let's change this to triangle and hear what that sounds like. Oh, beautiful. Very soft and lovely. There's the beginning of your synthwave ballad right there. Man, I really do feel like Disaster Piece a little bit. Okay, let us undo our mod. Did you know that this actually has an undo? Look at this. Look at this. I can actually click on here and go to my history. Filters and filter topology. We have this section right here that is output, modulation, and noise. We're going to start from the top. Filter mix. So you have two filters. Filter 1, filter 2. You can see filter 2 is bypassed right now. Let's turn on filter 2 and change it to another format so we can sort of get a sense of what happens when we change between different things. There are a lot of filter options right here, and all of them have a distinct characteristics. We'll talk about them in just a second, but I kind of want to just show off what happens when we switch around our filter routing. Right now, you can hear that we lost some of our sound, and that's because we're running this through a bandpass filter. Over here on the right, you can see filter routing. Completely on the left, filter 1 runs into filter 2, and completely on the right, they run in parallel. So you can have two, let's see, am I getting that right? Parallel versus serial. Yeah, this is serial and this is parallel. So as we go over here to the output section and change our filter mix, you can hear that we can send our engine between two filters all the way to one filter and all the way to the other filter. So if you ever wanted to, use both engines and have one engine go to one filter and the other engine go to another filter, or have this engine not go to a filter at all, so that you could just get a pure sort of like wave out of it in some way, or whatever you want to do. Maybe you're using the Granular engine. I don't know. Very, very useful, especially when you do things like this. When you can pan your filters. I'm a big proponent of creating big stereo, interesting sounds, and with modulation on two-pan filters, we can absolutely get that. Let's cross-mod our LFOs to pulse width. And just to complete a patch like this, let's go into our effects and add some reverb and delay, just to hear what that sounds like. I told you Pigments sounded good. going to save this preset, and I'm going to save it as walk through glitter strings. I'm going to choose the type, and it's going to be strings, and then I'm going to set some settings here. Oof, that sounds so fucking good. Let's go back to our analog triple VCO template and talk about filters. The analog triple VCO boots up with what's called the mini filter, and this is based on the mini Moog, as you might guess. So we have things like cutoff frequency, resonance, and I want you to take note what happens to the resonance here. This is important, and especially if you don't really understand much about filter topology. So when we look at filters based on certain synths, we're going to get some of those characteristics of those filters. And in the mini Moog and the Moog filter topology in general, what happens is when you turn up the resonance, which creates a frequency bump where the cutoff frequency is happening, we get the resonance, but we also lose some of the bass. See that? So, not all filters do that, but the Moog filter does. You can also drive the filter. All right, so very classic low-pass filter topology right there. Multimode is sort of the most basic Swiss Army knife filter you can have in here. We have cutoff and resonance like we mentioned before. This is key tracking, so when you're down here, the filter will be a certain frequency, and up here it'll open up a bit, and you can change that to all kinds of things right here. So what's a multimode filter? Well, first of all, we don't lose the bass when we turn up the resonance, but you don't self-oscillate like you do with the mini filter. So keep that in mind. Again, we're just already seeing different types of effects that different filters have on the sound. So down here in mode, here's where you'll be able to select other options. So if we click on here, we'll see all of these things. Don't worry, it's not that complicated. These numbers here designate the slope of the filter. So LP6 means that the slope when we reach the cutoff point is very chill and very, very not harsh. And then when we go over to LP36, you can see that we really cut off a lot when we get to that cutoff point. So being able to pick the filter that's appropriate is very, very important. A 12 or a 24 dB or 12 or 24 pole filter is a very, very common amount. Then we have high-pass filters. This is a low-pass filter. It lets the low frequencies pass. Here are the high frequencies up here. Our cutoff frequency, as you can see by the knob, has a hertz value, which is the frequency that it's starting to work at. So if we go over to high passes, we'll see we get the exact opposite. Let's go 24. Very psytrancey sound. Band passes do both at the same time. And then finally we have our friend the notch, which starts to sound a bit like a phaser, which I think is really, really cool. Again, very good for strings. If you combine this with pulse width modulation, you can get some really beautiful sounds. Okay, so that's multimode. We have a low-pass gate. This is a, I'm not going to describe this super well, but basically you can kind of see based on what happens here. They act as like sort of like a VCA and a filter at the same time. So the more level going in, the brighter the frequency, and the less level going in, the more frequency, the more high frequency we get. And you can see that we have a VCA mode and low pass gate mode. So that's kind of cool that they used it in there. I don't really use it all that much. Surgeon mode. This is going to be an extremely high pole filter in its various modes. This is definitely what I would reach for if I wanted to get that really classic notch sound. Sounds really good. Same thing with the band pass. Very, very, very cool. SEM filter. Now, the SEM filter, which you can find in something like the Pro 3 or I believe the OB6, very, very cool in that it can morph between modes. From high pass to low pass and band pass. And in between, we get a notch. So let's just go ahead and put a bunch of modulation on this real quick so you can hear what that sounds like. Pretty fucking cool, right? Imagine how this would sound in like a dirty wavetable. Oh wait, we don't have to imagine. So in case it wasn't clear by now, the synth can get really weird. I love it. I love it so much. Let's go back to our analog triple VCO and take a look at the other filters. Matrix 12, I don't really know what to say about this filter. It looks like it has some neat options like this notch one that is a low pass plus notch and a phase. If you're familiar with the synths that these come from, then you'll be happy that they're here. A comb filter is a complicated series of harmonic bumps that can get some very interesting, very interesting string-esque sounds. Phaser. Okay, so remember how we said a notch was basically a phaser? Here's that notch filter again. But the thing about this one is that you can increase what's called the poles. And if you ever see a phaser that says multiple poles on it, that's what it means. It's increasing the number of notches that the phaser is going to be working in. So very cool sound. Very useful to have a filter that can do that. Form it. This is how we get voice sounds. Well, that's very strange. But that's cool. You want things to be strange. Okay, so that's almost everything on this page. We talked about filter routing. We talked about filters. We talked about... Ooh, what's this? Neat. We talked about panning our filters. We talked about sending things to our filters. We have a noise section for this, where we can put some noise into the thing, which is very good. And then we have a mod source. So let's go ahead and make this up to here. We can use oscillator 3 to mod the other two oscillators. Sounds a lot like hard sync to me. So if we were to take this right here, and we were to assign an LFO to it, cool. Nice.